All right, good afternoon, everybody that's joining us. If you're just joining us, we were intentionally holding for a few minutes to make sure that we got everybody through the login process, and anybody that was coming and registering at the last minute, we didn't want to overlook them as well. So it looks like we're pretty close to what we had on our registration list. So we will go ahead and get started. And certainly we are recording this. The nice thing about being on a virtual meeting is we can record all of this, and we'll make the recording available at the end of this. We'll talk a little bit about the technology and procedures in just a moment. But first, my name is Kevin Bacon. I'm the Director of Design for the City of Atlanta Department of City Planning. This meeting is an informational session about some work that the Department of City Planning did through its Atlanta City Studio in partnership with the community in Cascade Heights from about 2017 to 2019. The focus of this is ideas for housing, specifically as it relates to the commercial district. What prompted this was, as a part of this work, we had moved early into the year of doing a proactive rezoning for a number of properties along between Herring and Beecher Road, and in that process discovered that the information that we had presented in advance of that just had not gotten to everybody, and there was a desire to learn more about that, which was difficult to do in the context of the limited time that we have in a normal NPU meeting. So we've worked with our NPUs and our own NPU team at the Department of City Planning to go ahead and with our new technology, go ahead and host a longer hour-long session to let everybody know the bigger idea of this and have a chance to ask questions. We had originally wanted to do this much earlier in the year. Unfortunately, the world changed on us, as it continues to do daily. And we were hoping to wait and see when things would calm down again and do it at a time when hopefully we could come back face to face, as there's not a lot of certainty in the world in terms of when that might be possible. Again, there was a desire to go ahead and have this meeting now. We're not taking any votes today. There's no legislative action today. It's just about sharing the information and getting that out there. And for everybody that's registered or anybody that expresses interest after that, we'll be happy to answer any additional questions and share the answers with everybody, share the presentation, and share this video as well. This is our first time running this outside of kind of the normal NPU meetings, just starting to get back into some of the engagement relative to our other project work. So, you know, we've put a lot of thought into how we get the information to everybody, such as emailing the presentation in advance. It's difficult for people just calling in. I know you won't be able to see this, and we're happy to work with you to somehow get you the presentation as best we can, and we'll be as descriptive as we can as we go. Certainly as we're learning how to do this, because we'll be doing more of these to try to advance our projects in this way. If you have any ideas or comments about just the matter of technology and platform and how we do this, we would love to hear those thoughts, and we'll share our email address and our phone number with you as we go. Some housekeeping of how to do this, and again, we've worked with our NPU team and the Department of City Planning, Leah LaRue and her team, Tony McNeil. If you've been to any of your NPU meetings lately, for those that are still hosting those, this is going to follow a lot of very similar protocols and how we're going to structure this and try to walk that fine balance of presentation and making sure that we're seeing everybody's hands in the air and as much time for questions as possible. If you're new to Zoom, we did want to spend a moment just getting you familiar with the setup and how we can quote unquote see you. If you're looking at your screen, and I'll talk about for people that are on the phone in just a moment, below at your bar at the bottom of the screen, you'll see that there is a chat icon. Certainly as you go, our preference would be to type your questions. We have a number of people that are supporting this meeting, and I'll do introductions in just a second. That's going to be the easiest way to make sure that we see all of the questions. And what's even great is everything that comes through this, we have a written record of copy. If for some reason we don't get to all of the questions today, I expect there will be many. That will give us an answer to come back, take those questions, respond to all of those, and send the answers out to everybody that's there. And certainly those can be shared with anybody that was unable to make the meeting. Also, what we'll do when we have 2 sections in the meeting for specifically for question and answer, what we do is we will read your question. I will do my best to respond. If I'm not quite getting there, I've got a number of teammates here that will help me make sure we answer it correctly. We will also unmute the person that was asking the question. So if there's a follow-up or we need to have additional discussion, we'll certainly do that. Also during Q&A, if you aren't comfortable typing in your question, if you look on the right-hand side after you've opened up the participants window, there is a feature to raise your hand. It's a button to raise your hand, and that will signify to us that you are waiting with a question. For people that are just joining us by the phone, you can dial *9 from your phone, and that will raise your hand. We will see your phone number, not necessarily your name. So what we'll do is we will read off a portion of the phone number and respond accordingly. It takes a lot of people to make all of this work. The technology is deceptively simple. So I'd quickly just like to mention that in addition to myself, other team members of ours that are on the phone, and we've all got our video turned on so you can see their smiling faces. We have Beth Malloy, who is our technical support extraordinaire. She is going to be running the checking the hand raising and doing the muting and the unmuting to make sure that we don't have any background noise and can kind of run traffic control on this. Sonia Sequeira, our community engagement manager, she's going to be helping anybody that has last minute technical difficulties or have issues. If you're running into something, you're welcome to reach out to her and chat. She's been working with everybody this week to make sure they have access to Zoom and have phone numbers, and it'll be likely coming from her after the meeting in terms of the follow-up presentation and video. Vanessa Lira, our assistant director for the Office of Design, she's going to be helping us with the questions and answers. She'll be reading off the questions or recording them as they come in and helping us read those off and address those in order. And then we also have Sushmita and Lori from our Office of Zoning and Development. They've been very involved in the proactive rezoning that we were working on, and will be here to answer a very specific questions to zoning that we get to in the presentation. For anybody that has any questions, and we'll put this slide up at the end too, so if you don't see this or don't have a chance to write it down, don't worry, we'll pretty much end up on this one. If you have any questions about the Zoom meeting or wake up tomorrow or anytime next week and realize a question that you had and didn't get a chance to ask, this is how you can get to us. For those on the phone, our number is 404-623-6585, and I'll repeat that at the end. And then our email address is atlcitystudio, and I'll spell that all out, atlcitystudio @atlanta.ga.gov. Our agenda today, we've broken this down into a couple of parts. One, the first section, community collaboration. We want to make sure everybody understands the genesis of this study, how we got started and where this came from. It wasn't just something that came out of thin air. There was a lot of thought over many of years before even the Atlanta City Studio came to Cascade Heights. We want to talk about that. Part one, we're going to get into the design concept. This is the bigger picture stuff everybody was asking about. And at the end of that, we'll pause and we'll answer some questions that people may have for that. We'll limit time on questions there. If we don't get to your question there, we're not going to ignore it. But what we don't want to do is not have an opportunity to get into part two, the next steps, which gets back into the first step of the rezoning that we were proposing. And provide information there. And then after that, we'll do another round of question and answer, and we can talk either about the big idea or get back to the specific rezoning. And again, for question and answer, I know it's Saturday afternoon. I appreciate everybody making time to come in from whatever you're doing today, or especially anybody that's been working on the weekend. We worked with our NPU chairs and team to try to find a good time that we felt would work. Certainly if you have feedback on that, we'd love to hear that too. But again, if we don't get to your questions, it's not that we're not going to address them. We will make sure that we're recording those and getting answers back out. First part, the community collaboration. the Department of City Planning became involved in this. I mentioned earlier when we had our Atlanta City studio, which you can see in the bottom left-hand corner of the left side image in the Cascade Heights Commercial District, that we were there for a little over 2 years. Had a great working relationship with the community there. If you go to www.historiccascadeheights.com, I'll say that again, www.historiccascadeheights.com. You can see the kind of final products of our working relationship there. There's a downloadable document. We also have printed copies of those that we can make available and even mail to you at this time, and really see the work that we did as a product of those 2 years. And the idea of the Atlanta City Studio, if you haven't heard about it before, it's a pop-up urban design studio. It's actually just now 4 years old. It left Cascade Heights in 2019. The idea for the studio was that it would move through the city and work with different communities. We're in South Downtown right now, working with, as you can imagine, a number of things working on and going on in downtown. But had a great 2 years in Cascade Heights, and the advancement of this idea for housing related to the commercial district is a product of that 2 years. But before all of that was not that we were inventing brand new things while we were in the studio. When we came into the studio in April of 2017, we were pretty clear that what we weren't going to do is just start making another plan for Cascade Heights or any of the neighborhoods. The Southwest Atlanta, like many of our areas of our city, have a lot of plans and studies that are already out there, and really what we know our communities are looking for implementation of those plans, and that's what we were interested in doing. And so there were three pretty primary plans that we looked at and worked through with the community, going all the way back to 2006 with the Camel and Cascade Corridors Redevelopment Plan, the Cascade Heights Commercial District Study, and the CHCD Redevelopment Initiative in 2016. And if you go to the website I mentioned earlier, there's synopsis of those plans. I think there are links to go and read those plans in their entirety. But the idea was, with the studio there and the design services that we provide, we have architects, landscape architects, urban designers on staff. We were looking to, by design, move proposals and recommendations for these plans into implementation. A couple of big things. Obviously, those plans had lots of ideas, and it's not an easy thing to kind of get down to, like, what's the most important and what do you really want to focus on in 2 years. And we listened a lot, and there were two themes among many that really came up time and again. One was, how can we support Cascade's identity as a community and a park? I think that's really central to a lot of the work that we did there, knowing that if one of the defining things of the city of Atlanta is its tree canopy, Cascade and really Southwest Atlanta really has some of that best canopy in the city. And as we're thinking about the growth of Cascade, how do we prioritize the protection and even the growth of that relative to anything else that we wanted to do? And that's an interesting thing to think about when you're talking about growth, particularly. And the second statement here is how can we do this while accommodating growth for a multi-generational community? And what we mean by that is we kind of understand the age of the population in Cascade today and the housing options that are there, and we'll get into those. And kind of that idea of how do you accommodate growth and a changing population. So as our senior residents are looking to maybe downsize or looking for things that aren't necessarily the single family option that you see in all of our neighborhoods. We heard that time and again, things that provided some other options. How do you do that in a way that works for residents of different age groups? And this really all ties back to what we're saying is the site, but really is the Cascade Heights Commercial District. So as we're thinking about housing, how also are we doing that in a way that ensures the continued success of this commercial district? It was great to see so many businesses that opened their doors while we were there, and we were happy to play whatever role that we could in that with our storefront redesign program. But really, as you think about growth and some of our other successful commercial districts throughout the city, what role does housing play with that? So that was another question that we were asking ourselves. So the concept as we think about this, and this is a diagram, I'm on slide 9, I'm going to do my best to mention slide numbers as we go, is understanding kind of the way that the commercial district works today. And if you look at the middle of the diagram, you see this kind of icon of buildings that represents the commercial district. You have Cascade Road is the major corridor that passes through there, and it's surrounded by all of these amazing single-family residential neighborhoods, and then of course Greenwood Cemetery is there as a reference. But if we look at other commercial districts around the city, and we looked at a lot of these, is one thing that really drives the success of those businesses, and I'm sure many of you have heard this before, is rooftops. And that's a difficult thing when you're only talking about single family. And so what we were looking for was what element of multifamily could be introduced in the right way to really help ensure the success and continued growth of that business district. And so this is an idea that kind of proposes how that could work. This worked. This all started again when we were in the studio. The Cascade Heights Community Development Corporation, and I'm going to pause here at the end of this to let one of their members speak, was something they were very interested in advancing and spent a lot of time over the course of summer 2018 really getting into kind of understanding how the commercial district works, how it's put together from an urban design standpoint, how the streets work, what are the housing types that we have there. If we're really thinking about the first statement of Cascade Heights community in a park and the tree canopy, how are we looking for new housing options in a way that protects trees and really protects the identity of the community from that standpoint. As we worked through those, we had starting in the first part of 2019, did a number of meetings very similar to this one, only we were in person in our studio space, which we miss a lot these days. We did one of those specifically with the property owners that were north of the commercial district, where we were really focusing the design recommendations, and a couple with the community at large, to just introduce the idea and hear people's feedback and any comments on the design ideas. A lot of those fed into refinement of that brought us to the rezoning that we were proposing earlier this year. So it's something that we've worked on for a long time, and I feel like we've had there have been comments on both sides of this, but feel like it was generally an idea well received because it was something that was so rooted in the community's plans and something that we'd spent a lot of time talking about. And we're happy to continue having these informational sessions because we want to make sure everybody hears this. I'm going to pause for just a second. I believe Corliss Clare from the Cascade Heights Community Development Corporation was actually going to just say a few things about that relationship. And do we have Corliss unmuted and with us?
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you, Kevin, and thanks to the rest of the team for your hard work. The Cascade Heights Community Development Corporation's goal for about the past 7 years has been to make the historic Cascade Heights Business District a gathering place, with a focus on featuring the area's rich history, culture, and vast green spaces that make this community Atlanta's community in a park. This initiative, named Housing Cascade, which is broken down into 2 phases, focuses on Beecher, Herring, and Dolphin, and it is part of the big picture strategy to help us revitalize the Cascade Heights Business District. This activity puts us in line with the Cascade Heights community's crystal clear mandate. That said, growth must be balanced with preserving both the built and natural character of this community. The Herring Beecher rezoning is a piece of the big picture puzzle. It moves 2 years of public engagement planning sessions at the Atlanticity studio, hopefully into action. We look forward to continuing working with you.
Thank you, Corliss, and it has been a pleasure working with you and the CDC and really all members of Cascade Heights, or the residents of Cascade Heights in the 2 years that we were there. All right, I'm going to get into the first part of this, the design concept. It's kind of two things that we're going to do here. One is explain some foundational, or I guess do some basic urban design education, but also tying that to specific things around the Cascade Heights Commercial District to try to explain what we're proposing. When we think about housing and how cities and neighborhoods work, there's three things that we're kind of thinking about. One is housing choices, and part of that is a close examination of the housing types that we hear. Most people are familiar with single family, what we call the detached house or the standalone house. But even within that, architecturally, there's a bunch of different styles to that, and you've got a couple of those in Cascade. But even beyond that, I think sometimes as planners, and maybe a little bit carelessly, we throw around different terms about attached multifamily and all these things, and duplexes and triplexes and whatever. And all of those kind of assume a different level of density and growth and new residents that you can take on. And so the first part of that is really understanding kind of what are appropriate housing choices and options that could be compatible with the neighborhood. The second part of that, and we really struggled with this term, and we landed on visible front doors, and really what this is about is the relationship between houses. We'll get into that a little bit too. And then connected streets, how streets work, and really, even though it's the last thing, in some ways it's the most important, because by the way that we design and connect our streets, those really set the pattern for which we're able to get the right relationships in terms of front doors and produce overall the types of housing options that we envision. We'll talk a little bit about the housing choices, and again, this is all starting from that, how do we provide more options than what may be in Cascade today to support different lifestyles, different demographics. What I'm showing right now, and I'm sorry, I'm doing a very terrible job of doing slide numbers, so we're leaving slide 14, which is titled Housing Choices, moving to slide 15, which is a grid of 6 images. 4 of them are faded out. We'll get to them in just a minute. But we're talking about the single family types of houses in this area, and houses come in all different shapes and sizes, but in Cascade and kind of the surrounding neighborhoods, we see 2 kind of types of the single family house. The ranches that really made an appearance all over Atlanta shortly after World War II, and then the single family cottages, whether they're present or going all the way back to Atlanta's 1900s, where you see a lot of those in our neighborhoods. They both do the same thing. They're single family residents of different square footages. They're just different architectural expressions of that in the way that they kind of sit on the property. And that's really the prevailing type of housing choice that you have in Cascade. And that's not to say that there aren't other options. Certainly there are other apartment buildings not too far from the commercial district. But what we were looking for was not necessarily the big housing options, the things that you see kind of going up all over the city, where it's maybe 4 levels of condos over storefronts. And that's an option too. But I think what we've seen in Atlanta and a lot of cities throughout the country is there's a finer scale and kind of spectrum of those choices. And if you follow planning or design at all, we refer to it as the missing middle. All of these kind of incremental sizes between the single family home and the really big stuff that you see that can accommodate growth and give people options that the market hasn't been producing, and for a big reason of that is because our zoning categories haven't really allowed that, and that's changing a lot in Atlanta and a lot of cities right now. And the idea of making those available is that it's something that we actually used to do in our neighborhoods, and these are all images from throughout the city. And so what we're talking about for this presentation and the housing choices that we're thinking about are small increments beyond just above the single family. So we're talking about accessory dwelling units, which is a very plannery term for the garage apartment or the second unit in the back. It's a smaller, usually rentable unit. And a couple of years ago, we made those by right some of our residential categories. But also as you go through some of our older neighborhoods and you see some of these throughout even Southwest Atlanta, houses that are a duplex, 2 units together, a fourplex. That's a pretty common type throughout the city, where you have 2 units on the first floor and 2 units stacked above. And then what we call multiplex beyond that, getting creative in how many units you can kind of attach to that. You see them in combinations of 6, 8, 12, and sometimes the sky is the limit. I would point out that the fourplex in the bottom middle of the screen is actually not too far from Cascade. If you drive from I-20 or back and forth and go down Lucille Avenue over the Beltline. This is right across from KIPP, the brownstone building has Kelsey on it. It's in the Westview neighborhood. And so these are the things when we're talking about housing choices, this is really kind of what we're talking about for the purposes of this presentation, because when you think about how the neighborhood is already set up in terms of property lines and the sizes of lots, these are things that are already compatible within the way that the neighborhood has already been set up. And as we've seen in a lot of neighborhoods over time in a fine grain, they can actually all inhabit the same blocks and the same neighborhoods pretty well, and don't really require to remove anything that's there and existing. Moving on a little bit to visible front doors, there's a relationship to how all of this works the best. And I think for a lot of people on the call, this is probably going to seem almost silly to talk about this, but neighborhoods work best when you have front doors facing front doors. It's kind of the thing that makes the active street front. It aligns all of the driveways. It kind of dictates where the trash goes. It all works pretty well. And for the most part, we do that. That's been a common planning technique, subdivision technique for decades, if not centuries. The problem is in Atlanta, and some of it's due to topography, some of it's due to just the unfortunate history of zoning with some of its not going to be beat around it. Some of it's racial motivations. You find that we have fronts facing backs, and the issue that causes is that you basically have incomplete blocks, and you have whole sections of streets where you don't have eyes on that, and it kind of falls into no man's land, and we get into issues of always having to rely on code enforcement or somebody else to deal with these, where at the very beginning, if we could just get this very simple condition set up, then it all works much better. Kind of highlighting one of those issues is Herring Road, and we'll get more into specifics about this later, where you do have front yards facing backs and some really deep lots on those properties between Herring and Beecher, and you can kind of see what that condition looks like. Ideally, what you would have is fronts facing fronts, and actually, if you on Herring Street, it's not, or Herring Road, it's not all front spaces back. There is one little house, I think at 2337 Herring Road, that kind of figured out what we would propose happen here, and kind of change some of those really deep, long lots, and correct that frontage condition. And it's a condition that we see throughout our city. It's not uncommon. It's just that we're actually trying to find ways to correct for that here. And then the last part is connected streets. When you're trying to get the right block sizes to make sure everything lines up, you assume that you have a nice connected network of streets. And in the middle of this slide, and I'm going to give you a number, this is slide 23, where we're looking kind of northeast over the Greenwood Cemetery with the Cascade Heights Commercial District in the middle. And towards the bottom of the slide, you're seeing all of the established single-family neighborhoods in Cascade, and you can kind of see how all of these streets create these blocks that allow fronts to face fronts, and it all works pretty well. And then as you look to where we've highlighted Philadelphia Avenue and Dolphin Drive, you've got this kind of wonky condition, for lack of a better word, where we have streets that just don't line up and they don't connect, and you have Dolphin Court Apartments in the middle of that's kind of ready for something new to happen there. That really makes it difficult to create those front to front conditions that we're trying to figure out how to make work in this area. Here we're getting into a little more depth. We're on slide, I believe this is 24, where you can actually see the property lines here. So we're showing kind of, if you look to the right hand of the screen, a block that's about 700 by 200, how you're able to get those nice standard lot sizes where the backs face the backs. And then on the left-hand side, you see Herring Road, where you have a really, really long block with a lot of backyards facing that also just doesn't, it could be a better walking experience along that street. So what we're thinking about, and this is part of maybe getting ahead of ourselves a little bit, is understanding how these streets work today, where you've got these offsets and weird disconnects, and really thinking about on this next slide, 26, the blue streets here of where might you have an opportunity to extend streets or maybe even potentially build new ones that set that block, those block sizes and shapes up that really match the rest of Cascade Heights and would create those opportunities to establish a better pattern for housing as well as the relationships, those fronts to fronts. So putting it all together, today, this is slide 28. We're looking again at just a aerial image of the Cascade Heights commercial district as it is today. You have Dolphin Court Apartments in the middle at the end of Dolphin Drive. You have Providence Missionary Baptist Church where Benjamin Mays meets Cascade Road. You have Beecher Road. I don't know if you can see my cursor that kind of leaves Benjamin Mays and goes to the north. Just want to kind of, for anybody that's not able to see this, talk a little bit about what we're looking at. And now I'm flipping it through, and this is on slide 29, an idea of if we connected streets and started thinking about the sizes of some of these other housing types, how all of this could work. So if we're looking at, and we'll get into the moves in just a moment, Beecher and Herring, you start to see an idea of how you could split those blocks and have an opportunity to create new houses that would face Herring Road. There's an extension of Dolphin Drive to Wortham that makes a better connection there and allows us to think about how the fronts of these new houses could connect. It does assume that Dolphin Court and its current condition goes away, and it even starts to think about if you were to really be ambitious and think about some limited sections of the Greenwood Cemetery property, how that could work as well. So it's this idea that we're looking at one, how you reconnect the fabric of the commercial district that would be very similar to the neighborhoods, and provide better connections for new housing types to that commercial district. They would all be in a short walking distance that would also be helpful to those businesses. I'm going to go on to here because I think we're going to kind of break this into some pieces and talk through it. I guess I got ahead of myself a little bit on slide 30. We're just showing those big street ideas. Herring Road is still there, but we're correcting, have ideas of how you correct that front to front condition, the extension of Dolphin Drive to Wortham, and then even this idea that Wortham could be extended and brought back all the way to Cascade Road for some really big ideas about the park. So we've broken this into steps, and you know, I think some people might jump to calling these phases. This is not a master development plan. We are not a developer. We're not coming out here and starting this tomorrow. This is just an idea of how this could work. And so we tend to think of these things in kind of bite-sized chunks, like logically. If you were to start somewhere, what's the low-hanging fruit? What's the easiest part of this? What's the hardest part of this? You know, what are not the biggest lifts? If you're taking a test, don't start with the hard questions first. And so we tend to think about Herring Road as being the biggest first opportunity for this. Where to make all of that work, I'm on slide 32, is we're really looking at those single family properties, those really deep properties that as you get towards the back of those properties on Herring Road, is there an opportunity to possibly have additional houses on those, and how would we do that so that you could create that frontage condition on Herring Road? And then we also have some ideas too as you get closer to the commercial district, that if you ever did, we talked about at the beginning, those big multifamily types, the apartment buildings, the 4 stories over storefronts. If you really wanted to look at doing those really want to happen within your commercial district, and look for big properties that you already have down there, So there was a lot of discussion about, well, what if the Postal Service leaves someday? Maybe that's an opportunity for that. And that makes a lot of sense. You put the most rooftops or the most housing units kind of closest to the core of that, and then kind of step down the scale of the housing types as you get into the single family neighborhoods. Switching to slide 33 and seeing the kind of illustrative plan or the rendered plan over the top of that, you can see how that works. There's an opportunity to, this idea that between Beecher and Herring, those properties could be subdivided or split and become basically two properties. And we'll talk more in the second part about how all of that could work, so that you get another kind of row of single family homes, just like our friend on 2337 Herring Road that already figured that out. We've been trying to figure out how they pulled that off. It kind of sets the pattern that we're looking for. And then maybe as you get into the areas between Herring and Wortham and Philadelphia, where do you have to kind of go to that next increment of housing, those duplexes and those quadplexes that we talked about, and even something up to 12plex if that's kind of what the neighborhood wanted to do or what the market was ready to bring to the table. We're not necessarily saying that we've figured out every parcel and every building that goes on those, but there's a flexibility that could be done with zoning to allow some variety in that, and some restrictions on that if that's what we want into place. Getting into the second one, how can we better connect Dolphin Drive to the neighborhood? This is looking at very much at the Dolphin Court Apartments, how it kind of presents as this really awkward kind of break in Dolphin Drive between the back part of the neighborhood, and there's an idea that even on how the apartment is split in these four corners today, and how there are vacant properties behind that between Dolphin Court and Wortham, that there would be an opportunity to extend Dolphin Drive and kind of create that first new block. And then looking at the new parcels that could create, and the additional housing types that could be provided alongside of that. And here you can see it in the rendered plan of that, where the kind of old form of Dolphin Court goes away. And this is kind of the middle piece of that, right? There's obviously conversations that would have to have with the ownership of Dolphin Court. We did try to reach out with them as a matter of this process. Could not get in touch with that. We understand that there's new ownership now, so that we could restart those conversations. But that's kind of the second step of figuring all of this out, and it's not something that's at a point right now where we're proposing any rezonings or anything, but it's just sharing the idea of how this could work. And then the last piece of this, which is the really ambitious piece, is how could we connect Wortham Avenue through Greenwood property while also protecting the existing tree canopy. And I will say I think there was some representation from the cemetery as a part of this. There's to my knowledge, not any conversations about changing hands of land or anything like that, but it's just kind of thinking, 10, 20 years ahead that if growth really does happen here, and I am aware that we've just hit a recession, and that's the market cycles are always going to be with us, but again, thinking ahead as far as we could, if there were additional opportunities, what might they be, is thinking about this connection of Wortham. I'm on slide 38, that kind of extends where it does off of Herring Road, kind of comes into the Greenwood property, turns south behind Philadelphia Baptist Church, would come along the backside of properties in parallel with Cascade Road, and then turn around and head south and connect with Cascade Road on some vacant property there. And the idea with that is basically just creating new blocks to, again, create new parcels that would allow for the mixing of those duplexes and triplexes, those kind of missing middle housing types in there. I will say we've had some thoughts about what the zoning category could be. I'm going to dip my toes into the zoning realm here. You all may have heard about the MRMU zoning, which was really introduced, I guess, just a couple of years ago to try to bring some of those back. That may be the tool for this job. We're not quite sure. There are certainly other zoning categories that we could look at. For us, that's kind of a step 2 or 3 of this process, and something that we would come back with, and whenever we're ready to do that, do informational sessions like this one, and come to the NPUs and talk more specifically about those when we get there. But again, this is an idea thinking decades ahead of how this could really expand and provide more housing in the commercial district. And you can see this again on slide 39. how those new blocks would look and where that could go. We did talk to Philadelphia Baptist Church as a part of this. They were actually engaged in one of the very first meetings or discussions about it when we were first kind of having some of these ideas all the way back to 2018. So I'll pause there for a minute, and I think I'm taking a really, really, really long time because I see that it's 4:45. I do want to be respectful of everybody's time. We'll see how the questions go. This is new territory for us. I will say for us, I think we had said 4 to 5. We have this zoning room or this Zoom room until 6. So if we need to extend to spend the time on this, we're willing to do that.
All right.
So where are we starting?
Thank you, Kevin. So I've collected a few questions through the chat. 2 of the questions, one from Leonard Smith and one from Dre Virgin, are related specifically to part 2, where we're talking about the rezoning. So okay. I propose that we hold those questions once we've gone through those slides, as you may answer them throughout the presentation. But there was one question from Dre Virgin about the Dolphin Court apartment that I think okay. is more related to part 1. And so the question is, has the owner of Dolphin Court apartment taken a position on the rezoning, and what is the latest temperature on their willingness to sell and redevelop in line with community goals?
Yeah, certainly as a part of this process starting in 2018, we were very interested in talking to them, and we went through a number of channels to try to connect with them. I think we finally, through property records, had a number of phone numbers where we tried to reach out to them, left a number of messages, and then unfortunately just were never able to connect with them and get them involved in the process. My understanding is fairly recently that there's new ownership of the Dolphin Court apartments, and I don't know if there's somebody else on here that can confirm that. They would not be affected by this next part in terms of the proactive rezoning that we're talking about. But we would certainly be interested in restarting the conversation if there is new ownership, or if that isn't true and it's still the owners that we had tried to reach out with. We would love to talk to in either case, talk to the owners to kind of figure out what they're interested in and what their position is on this.
Okay, thank you, Kevin. We do have one other question that came in from Karen Babineau. Are you confirming that just using code enforcement on Herring to clean up that block will not address the issue?
You know, that came up in some of the NPU meetings, and we've talked a lot about that. You know, it will to a certain extent. You can call them like everybody does in the city, and certainly they'll get out there and address some of those issues. And I think if the concern is just kind of the overall cleanliness of backyards where it meets the streets, and trying to make sure that the backyards aren't overgrown or spilling into the sidewalk, that is certainly a route that can be taken and continued to be utilized to try to correct kind of at least the basic maintenance of that condition. We kind of see it as addressing the symptoms, but not really the long-term issues with that we heard in the 2 years that we were there, where it really feels like an unsafe street, where there's not a lot of activity on the street in the sense of people that live there and are actively watching it the way that a lot of us do in our own neighborhoods. And we truly feel that the best way to get at doing that is to correct that condition, where you would have additional houses that could face the street. And by doing that would be able to address some of those maintenance issues as well. It's not the easy way to do it. You certainly can't just pick up the phone and call somebody every time, or it's not as simple as calling somebody. You've got to be patient and wait for those homes to be built if that goes forward. But I think if you're really interested in how you reinforce Herring Road as a walkable street with people that live on that and are a part of the neighborhood and connected to the commercial district, that this is the way to go.
Thank you, Karen. Does that answer your question? We'll give you a chance to respond.
Yes, that was a concern, so that's why I brought it up.
Great, thank you.
Thanks,
and I realized that I did not actually give Dre the floor to respond to the Dolphin Court answer as well.
Okay. Do we want to go back and give them an opportunity?
Definitely. Yes. And we are about to unmute you here. All right, Dre, you should be unmuted if you want to speak to that any further.
No, I mean, the biggest question is really about the conversations that's been had with the owners, and if there's a continued conversation to kind of gauge where they are with actually possibly redeveloping or selling the property. I think that's probably the primary concern at this point, to understand kind of where they stand and how that works into the overall plan that we have.
It's a good point. And you know, the first step in any of kind of the thinking through this was to talk to any of the owners. Dolphin Court obviously is one of the ones we're most interested in because of just the amount of property that they own and kind of the way that sits central to kind of how we're thinking about the area. And so if anybody has a contact or kind of a connection to the ownership that they want to, we'll put our phone number and email address back up. We would love to have the conversation with them the same way that we've had with any of the owners that we could identify in the area north of the commercial district.
Okay. We have one more question on this first part from Leonard Smith. Did you consider adding residential along Beecher and Herring on the Providence Church property and have them go to structured parking to maintain their car count?
I don't think we talked about the structured parking aspect of it. It's an interesting idea. Structured parking is pretty expensive, but it's you know, definitely open for conversation. We did talk to Providence a lot. They also have their own community development corporation and actually are a pretty substantial property owner in the area. So when we talk about the property owners that we reached out to, they were definitely one that they were at the table. Some of the properties could work. I think the issue is if you're talking about the properties between Beecher and Herring as you go north of the church, in a lot of ways they use those for the community gardens through there. We love community gardens, so if those are going to be active and maintained and something that the community loves, the plan actually still shows those staying there. You know, as we continue to work through this, we very much see Providence a partner and how they would like to include their properties, and that we're happy to have that conversation.
Okay. And is Leonard unmuted?
Yes, that addressed my question. So,
Thank you, Leonard. Mr. Smith.
Leonard's fine.
And next we have Robert Gray. He has his hand raised to ask a question.
Hello.
Hey, Mr. Gray.
Yeah, how's it going? I have the brochure. First of all, I would like to thank you guys for all the hard work that you're doing. Has the rezoning schedule changed where we are? I'm looking at one that said it was going to be introduced to City Council November 18th, 2019. Were there modifications in the rezoning schedule? Where are we today as it relates to the proposed rezoning?
Yeah, we'll talk a little more in depth about the rezoning in the second part, but to go ahead and address your question now, that whole schedule has to be rebuilt. We'll talk about kind of any changes to that proposal and coming back to the NPUs. We're imagining that we would come back again to the NPUs following this conversation over the next couple of months. But really moving forward with that after the NPUs is really up in the air right now, because what would have to happen is this would go in front of the zoning review board and have a public hearing. And as you may or may not be aware, none of the boards and commissions are meeting at this time because they have to legally be in person at City Hall, and City Hall is still closed for business. So we can continue to work with the NPUs to kind of make sure that they're happy and comfortable with this and get their recommendation. But until the zoning review boards happens, we're kind of on pause after that.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. I'm glad we were able to, I think I saw your name yesterday and trying to get connected with Zoom. And I'm glad to see that we were able to help you and get you on here today. Thank you for coming.
Yeah, appreciate that. Thank you.
Kevin, I think we can move on to part 2, and I have 2 questions on part 2 on hold for when we get to that Q&A session.
Okay. I almost muted myself. That wouldn't have worked. Part 2, next steps. So this is getting back to the where we kind of left everything in January and February of last year. So you may recall that if you're in any of the neighborhoods that surround this area, you like maybe remember some of our faces of coming to your meetings and talking about this, and then ultimately coming to NPU I and S for a vote on the matter. And we were talking specifically about the Herring and Beecher properties, and I'll talk more about the outcomes and the next steps or the kind of schedule for all of this, so what we intend to do next with that. But what we were proposing is that first piece of the plan. So in the last part of this, we talked about how we saw this coming together in kind of 3 steps. And the first part of that is the Herring Road step, or more specifically those properties between Beecher and Herring Road, just north of Providence Missionary Baptist Church. And in those, and we spent a lot of time really thinking about what would be the best way, if this is the condition that we're really trying to get, where we're trying to kind of help get rid of those, not get rid of those, but help alleviate some of those backyards and create an opportunity to have new parcels that would have fronts facing fronts along Herring Road. How could we do that? And we thought a lot about if we were homeowners in that area, what would motivate us the most, and what would be the easiest route to do. We boiled it down to kind of 2 opportunities of one, could you do it with accessory dwelling units, those kind of granny flat apartments that we showed earlier on in the presentation. The challenge with those is a very weird kind of zoning condition of this, where because those are really deep lots, they actually count as what we call double frontage lots. Basically, they have 2 fronts because they touch a street on both sides, which actually does not allow them to have accessory dwelling units, even though they're zoned for them. The accessory dwelling units, or those granny flat apartments, actually have to be in what we consider a true backyard, where it touches in the backyard of another one. So we could go through, we've talked about it, and we know it's a shortcoming in kind of the language of how we deal with accessory dwelling units, and are looking at that. But that assumes that everybody that lives in these houses are very interested in hiring architects and builders to come out and build accessory dwelling units if we are able to change the code and do that. And that seemed like that was asking a lot. And that's certainly still a course of action. But what we were interested in doing was, I'm jumping ahead here, was thinking about the properties of subdividing those and changing the zoning category of those slightly to allow them to actually be split and sold off as a new property, and let somebody else develop those, and not necessarily put all of that on the homeowner. One thing to kind of note about all of these properties, so there's 23 in total in the area that we're looking at. The question came up a lot in the rezoning process of where were the homeowners? There weren't many of them at the meetings, and this is to kind of talk a little bit about why that's difficult, because in some of those properties you do actually have the resident homeowners that live there, but in a lot of cases we actually have a lot of rental properties where getting to the homeowner, the actual owner of the property, has been a challenge, and in some cases they're actually owned by corporations. So for a fair number of those, we're dealing with properties where it's actually not the homeowner occupant of the site. And I am going to maybe stop for just a minute and check with Vanessa or the rest of my team to make sure that I got that accurately, because that was a new piece of information that we've added for this.
Yes, that is correct. Given our data on homestead applications as well as property owner information, we've gathered that about 56% of the properties are owner occupied, and the remaining are evenly split between homes that are owned by individuals but not under homestead, so presumably not owner occupied, and then properties that are owned by corporations.
So again, and you probably remember from the very beginning of the presentation, I'm on slide 44, we talked about the actually used Herring Road as a example for the kind of the urban design conditions that we like to see, where we have front doors facing front doors, or front yards facing front yards, whichever you prefer to think about it. But of how right now we have basically, if you look at the diagram on the right-hand side, we have homes on Herring Road that are facing very deep backyards from homes that are built and facing Beecher. The ideal condition of that is even best exemplified by the property at 2337 Herring Road, where they actually have a lot that did what we're proposing and split, subdivide, and build a house with its front yard facing the front yards of all the other houses on the other side of Herring Road. And so we kind of took a clue from that of well, could we make that work? Could we do more of that? Because that's what we would like to see. That's what in our minds kind of solves the weird condition of having these deep lots. And the way that we're proposing to do that, and this is the proactive rezoning that the city is the applicant for, that we brought to NPU, I, and S, is to do a change of zoning from R4, all of those properties are R4 today, to a different zoning category called R4B. And what's the difference in that? The fundamental difference in that is the what we call a minimum lot size. What's the smallest property or parcel that you can have in that zoning category? And under R4, you have to have a property, the smallest it can be is 9,000 square feet, which is a really, really big site. So the reason that none of those other parcels today could actually subdivide and split is because if you split those like right down the middle, they're all much smaller than 9,000 square feet. So it doesn't work. By R4 zoning, you are out of conformance, and we would not allow that to happen. But if we were to go and change those to R4B, R4B's minimum property size is much smaller. It's 2,800 square feet. So about a third of what R4 allows. They are smaller properties, but they're about the same size as what you see on 2337 Herring Road. So you still get a front yard, a backyard, and have a size for a single family house that is similar to what we see in terms of the form and character of the rest of the neighborhoods in Cascade. It's just on a slightly more compact footprint. But we went through and tested all of these, and with the exception of, I think, the very tip of the property, this is a viable solution. And so that's why we're suggesting that this is the course of action. And so if we were to do the R4 to R4B as we propose, what does this do? What happens tomorrow? And just like we were talking about, it lowers the minimum lot size required, and that's it. It changes those, but it doesn't make anything in there non-conforming. It doesn't mean that somebody has to get out of their house. It doesn't mean that anybody has to start development immediately. All it does is allow the homeowners that live there today, or the property owners that they're not, in case not all of the homeowners are occupants. It allows somebody to go through a subdivision process. So again, they would have to come to the city, and we would be willing to work with any of the property owners on this to actually go through a subdivision process where they would prepare a new parcel plan, create that, and then that parcel could be sold to a home builder or a developer to build that house. So that's pretty much the only action that the homeowner would need to take. If a homeowner doesn't want to take advantage of it, then they don't. Again, we're thinking years ahead and kind of putting options on a table to get that condition that we ultimately want. So while it doesn't necessarily make the change overnight, it at least makes the change possible. And the benefits that we see with this, again, is you over time, as we would hopefully get more like 2337 Herring, you start to get those front doors, and it starts to feel and work much more like a neighborhood street that's really a valuable connection to the commercial district. There's a little opportunity for some income from those property owners by virtue of subdividing and ultimately selling that additional part of the parcel. Also, if you're not a fan of yard work, as I spent maybe a couple of hours sweating today, it's a lot less grass to cut or wisteria to cut back, which is not a bad thing as we get into the summer months. And then you ultimately have more rooftops for your commercial district. This doesn't necessarily get into the multifamily ones that we're thinking about for steps 2 and 3. We understand that this isn't the biggest, I guess, splash in terms of rooftops that you could add, but for us, this is just as important step because it corrects a very difficult condition for Herring Road in a way that does get more residents in the area, but also makes what we truly believe is Herring a much safer street. Where we kind of left this is Mr. Gray was asking. We started the official proactive rezoning process at the beginning of the year, and it's funny to think about what the world was like back in January. But we started by, again, reaching out to the property owners, both for Beecher and Herring, that we could reach out to, and really everybody in that study area that we were showing, to check back with them and let them know that we were excited to be moving forward with this first step. And that meeting took place on January 21st, 2020. Following that, in January and February, we went to the Cascade Avenue Neighborhood Organization, as well as the Beecher Hills Neighborhood Association, and presented to them as well. And then following that, we went to NPUI on February 19th, and then NPUS on February 20th. And I'll be honest, the outcome of those, I'm sure everybody's waiting for me to talk about it, was that both voted to recommend to not approve the rezoning application. And what was really clear to us was there was just not a lot of understanding of what it was that we were proposing to do. We thought, and we made the mistake of we thought we had kind of done this presentation enough times, the full version of the presentation enough times, that people were aware of it, they were comfortable with it, and then we were ready to proceed. And what was very clear in that, there were a lot of questions, very good questions, that people weren't comfortable with it, didn't understand that. So we heard that loud and clear, and we took the step back to make time to do this again as much as we need to, or as often as we need to make sure everybody's comfortable with this, so that when we do, we're preparing to go back again, both to NPU, INS, with the proposal to see if there are any new questions, or if people are interested in doing this. And I think we heard that the most at NPUS, the vote was very, very close. I'm sorry, I think I'm getting a lot of glare as the sun starts to change. So let me just adjust my monitor here. So we're eager to talk to everybody and make sure all the questions are answered before we move forward with that. We do have letters of recommendation. We've received those from Beecher Hills Neighborhood, as well as Adams Park. So there seemed to be a lot of support, at least at the neighborhood level, where this the impact of this hits home the closest, and it didn't bubble up to the NPUs. So that's why we're taking the time here. I think that's the end of part 2. Vanessa, or anybody else from our team, did I miss any other fine points to make, or are we ready to go to questions?
I think we're ready to go to questions. The first question is from Leonard Smith. Has the current Beecher landowners taken a position on the rezoning proposal, and have any of the landowners indicated if they will sell the part of their land fronting Herring?
Could you repeat that one more time?
Have the current Beecher landowners taken a position on the rezoning proposal, and have any of them indicated that they do want to sell the part of their land fronting on Herring?
Okay. What is your recollection of that, Vanessa? I think, we've really struggled. It's funny for this first part to actually connect with those specific owners of those properties. I think we've had some limited contact and some support, but I have not had those conversations specifically.
Sure. Yeah, I can speak to that, and if anyone else on the team would like to add on, feel free. The CHCDC mailed all of the property owners within 300 feet of the proposed rezoning, obviously including the properties of the rezoning as well, mailed them information on the rezoning as well as our proposal. And so that was our first round of individually contacting them, in addition to the community meetings that we have gone through and reached out through different organizations to try and get as many of them there as possible.
I'd say similar to Dolphin Court Apartments, if anybody knows the actual property owner of any of those properties on Beecher or Herring, and get the sense that they haven't heard about this or felt like they haven't been contacted, please, we are eager to talk to them.
Mr. Smith, does that answer your question? Do you have any further follow-ups on that?
No, I think that answers my question. It seems to me that if the rezoning goes through, then it actually increases the value of land, the rights that they have. They can maintain their current position as is, or if they wanted to take advantage of it, they could either sell or develop the land themselves. So I don't see how they would be hurt by going through this rezoning. So yeah, you answered my question.
Wonderful, thank you very much.
With my
Our next question is from Dre Burgeon. In terms of ADUs, what are the square footage caps that owners must adhere to? And considering this option would have to be balanced with revenue opportunity costs. For example, a 2-in-2 unit versus a 1-in-1 unit to develop to generate viable options to build. And we have gathered kind of in the background some zoning information on the ADU, so I can share that as well prior to your response, Kevin, if that's okay.
That's a pretty technical question to answer on the fly. I think if you and the zoning team have figured that out on the side, I would defer to you. Otherwise, I would say, Dre, if we could have a moment to look into that one further, I would love to do that. It's a good question.
Okay, that sounds great. So we have gathered here with our zoning experts, the maximum square footage for ADUs is 250 square feet. But as Kevin had mentioned earlier in the presentation, they're only allowed in a rear yard and the front door must face the front yard. And so because of the double frontage lot conditions for those properties, an ADU, I'm sorry, 750 square feet, if that's not what I said, I was just corrected. A variance would be required currently if any of those properties want to have an ADU because of their double frontage condition. And so that is one of the reasons why we steered away from that as a primary way for addressing the current condition and really leaning towards a rezoning that would allow the properties to be split, which seemed a little bit less cumbersome of a process. I will clarify that with the current zoning R4 ADUs outside of the double frontal lot condition, generally ADUs are allowed in R4, but currently they are not allowed in R4B. So through the rezoning, the ADU would no longer be an allowed use for those properties. And Mr. Burgeon, if you are unmuted to respond with any further comments, you may do that as well.
No, I mean, the biggest concern is really ROI when it comes to ADUs. Obviously, it costs to develop an ADU, and if it's the ROI doesn't kind of meet the standard for residents to actually kind of invest in, then how much could we actually incentivize people to choose such an option? So it's really just understanding kind of what we could do or what's available to people to kind of incentivize them to take such an option, whether it's a zoning concern or just a profitability concern.
Okay. Any further comments on that, Kevin, or anybody else from the team?
No, I think it's a very valid point. It's one we thought about a lot. Maybe not in terms of profitability. Certainly, we did talk about it, but for us, the kind of income generation wasn't the primary motivator of that. As much as it was just trying to kind of put ourselves in the shoes of people that own these properties and kind of, if our ultimate goal is to get something built that improves the frontage along Herring, what is the most likely option that somebody would just be motivated to move on. And we kind of felt, by looking at the rest of the city too, I mean, accessory dwelling units have been popular, but the actual people taking advantage of the fact that we made them legal by right in some of our art categories, it isn't really happening in a huge way that I think a lot of people anticipated. So for us, even outside of kind of the double frontage, kind of the code issue that we'd have to overcome, is would that motivation really be there to actually do accessory dwelling units versus the route of a subdivision and a transaction of the property to a builder that might be more motivated to go ahead and create the new housing unit, and not put I guess the burden on the actual existing property or homeowner themselves. So I'm happy to continue that conversation if we'd like to schedule some time, kind of what makes the most sense. But that we agree there. It's kind of a back and forth on that one.
May I make one comment about the
Sure.
ADUs? I just wanted to point out that 750 square feet maximum, including any unheated space like a garage, is not going to give you the same scale. It's not going to give you the same scale as the houses on the other side of the street. So
It's a good point. Are we good on that question, or do we need to, is there a follow-up, or do we need to move on?
I think we can move on to the next one. The next question is from Brenda Walker. What NPUs will you be visiting about this proposal?
So we will be going back to both NPU-I and NPU-S. And what will be changing about this application is we're actually removing one of the parcels from this. I will jump back to a map of this. This, I don't know if you can see my cursor, so I will try to paint a picture with my words. The very tip of Herring Road in Beecher, where you actually come back to Beecher, that property we are removing from the list of properties, and we're doing that for two reasons. One, that is that's where you actually split the NPUs. That one parcel is an NPU-I, everybody else is an NPU-S. NPU-I had the greatest number of concerns, and the first thing we did when we heard those concerns is we really went back and took a hard look at that parcel. It has a really weird geometry. It's a triangular shape, to really check our work and see, even if that did really take advantage, or could take advantage of what we're proposing for R4 and R4B, because it's a three-sided parcel and has very weird geometries. You could not get it down to the lot sizes that we're looking for, and it really doesn't work. So it made sense from a technical standpoint to take it out, and we would hope that would make NPUI more comfortable with it. NPUI it will still go to NPUI. They will still be allowed to review this and comment on this because they are adjacent to that. We've been talking to the chairperson, Ms. Glover, over the last couple of days via email. So when we do get ready to go back to NPUs, we will be going to NPUI and presenting again, as well as NPUS.
Thank you, Kevin. And just to add to that, we have some more technical information. If and when the rezoning is approved and a property owner is interested in the subdivision of property itself also has to go through the NPU process for review and comment. So that is an additional step that the NPU system will be involved in even after the rezoning process is completed, if that is successful.
That's a great point. Thank you for bringing that up.
Our next question, oh, I'm sorry. I will let Ms. Walker respond if she would like. I am going to unmute you here. Okay, you should be unmuted.
anybody able to hear Ms. Walker? Ms. Walker, if you can hear us, we're having a hard time hearing you. We hear something, but we can't hear what you're saying. No, ma'am. Well, we heard it a little bit. No, still not getting you. I'm sorry.
If you're able to type in, I can also read your response out loud to everyone. That might be a little bit easier.
In the interest of time, do we want to move on to another question while we try to figure out how to connect with Ms. Walker, and we can come back to that one?
Yes, our next question is from Bobby Flournoy. Oh, excuse me, something just happened with my Zoom and I lost my view of the question. Okay, my apologies. Okay, the question from Bobby Flournoy: on the lot subdivision, are you proposing to follow the setback used by the current infill house on Herring? And Kevin, we also have Shashmita on the line to answer the question regarding the zoning technicalities, if you would like.
Yes, Shashmita, do you want to handle that one? Can you, or Lori, whoever?
Sure. So to answer that question, so what we do is usually we look at the majority of houses on the block if we want to match the setback. But in this case, we have one house, so it's kind of tricky. We can look at one house, and if the second house proposed on that block, we want to match with the current house, that can be done technically. Yes. I hope that answers his question.
Bobby, if you would like to respond, we will work on unmuting you. Oh, looks like you are unmuted.
Yeah, no, that's fine. I was trying to figure out, I think most of us, certainly from Beecher Hills, we drive down Herring. So trying to figure out what it would actually look like to get all of the new houses on that side of the street, if they're going to follow, because I think that the infill house is closer to the street than the houses that are on the left-hand side, the post office side of the street. So just trying to see what type of continuity would be put in place, if that's even part of the zoning, or if that's just more of a detail for that would be put in place for that street.
I just pulled up slide number 46, which shows the comparison between R4 and R4B, and Shashmita, feel free to correct me if I get this wrong, but on R4B is a matter of just the ordinance itself has a 20-foot minimum front yard setback.
That is correct.
Yes. Yeah, that's 20 feet setback. But if you the property owner wants to match the front yard setback with the existing infill house, then they can do it based on the regulation that we have that says that you can match the setback, the front yard setback, with the majority of houses on the block. So we only have one house on the block. So technically, we can match the setback or the front yard setback for the new house that will be proposed next.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And I did get a response from Ms. Walker. She said that her question was answered, and her concern was that the one line NPUI had been removed. Would you still come to NPUI because we did submit a favorable recommendation? So yes, we will go back to NPUI for review and comment when we are ready. We don't have a date yet for when we're going to go back to the NPUs, but we will go back to NPUI when we do so. And I believe those are all the questions that we have on the chat, but I don't know if there was anyone that had their hand raised that would like to speak as well.
We currently have no hands that are raised in the participants section, so we're good to go there.
Okay, we have one more question that just came in from Karen Babineau. Can there be a requirement to match the setback of the existing house?
No.
Okay, so the setback requirement is then the 20 feet minimum for the zoning, and each individual owner can choose to match the existing house, but it's not a requirement.
Yes.
And I would add too that those lots, I mean, they're going to be pretty small lots. 2,800 square feet plus or minus is not a very big lot, even though right now they sure seem that way. So some of that's going to help kind of reinforce these not sitting way back from the street. I mean, the 20-foot minimum certainly helps, and the existing pattern helps, but you can really only go from just the kind of a layout of a house so far back before you run out of property on those.
Ms. Babineau, and you are welcome to speak further on the matter as well if you would like. Okay.
No, thank you. That was just a question because people are worried about the uniformity of the existing house. So that should be, I guess, the standard for the rest of the infill if people choose to do that. So that's why I asked that question.
Okay.
I understand the minimum, but could there be more? I mean, how are we going to incentivize people to try to, I guess, do it the same way as the existing house, because they can get a variance if it doesn't work, because you have a minimum.
Right. They could get a variance, and they would still have to go back through the NPU. So that would be a question that would come. But otherwise, I mean, you have I guess, are you concerned that they're going to sit too far back or have too much variability?
Too close.
Too close.
Mm-hmm.
Do we know what the dimension is for 2337 Herring in terms of how close that is to the property line?
Yes, I am just checking here, not incredibly precise dimensions, but just off of a Google aerial, it looks to be that the front porch is about 35 feet back from the street. And so the minimum requirement for the setback being 20, the houses may be closer to the street.
But it won't be such a noticeable difference.
It should not be, because the parcel sizes would be small, and so if you're looking to maximize your profit or your developable area with a lot this size, I would not anticipate too much variability, just because you'd want to be able to fill as much as the site as possible with a home for this particular zoning category. And again, if a property owner does choose to split their lot, they will go back to the NPU, and so that could be another opportunity to ask what their intentions are, and if they have a site plan that could indicate the front lot setback, front yard, excuse me.
Townhomes are not going to be allowed, correct?
Correct.
Therefore, be a single family only zone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Our next question is from Eunice Glover. Her question is the owner of the one house being removed from the project knowledgeable of this? And is there an impact to their value?
I don't believe that we've been able to contact that specific owner individually. If somebody else knows the answer to that, I'd be interested. Feel free to speak in. The impact to the value wouldn't change if we don't rezone it. Then there would be no change to the lot, and therefore there should be no change in value. I mean, we can't say with any certainty that the values won't change at all ever, because we're all subject to properties increasing and decreasing in value all the time, but it shouldn't be affected by by us not taking an action on the property.
Ms. Glover, if you'd like to speak on that.
Thank you for answering my question. Thank you very much.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you for coming today.
Thank you for presenting this.
I believe these are all the questions that we have, and I don't see any hands raised.
Okay. Well, we've taken maybe 30 more minutes of everybody's time on a lovely Saturday afternoon, so I think we've enjoyed your questions and appreciate everybody's time. Certainly, just like at the beginning of the presentation, if anybody thinks of anything tomorrow, 2 days from now, a week from now, this isn't the end of the conversation. We're happy to continue talking and answering questions. So I do have back on the screen right now our office phone number, which we do keep that line open even though we're not physically at the studio. It's a mobile device that we keep. So if you don't get an answer, we do check the voicemail and we can take questions that way, as well as our mainline email address, and I will read those off again. The phone number is 404-623-6585. Once again, that's 404-623-6585. And the email address is atlcitystudio, atlcitystudio @atlantaga.gov. And what we will do now that we are concluding the presentation is we will be available on one of our websites. But certainly for anybody that registered today, whether you were here or not, we will provide a link to the recording of the presentation, as well as the presentation materials themselves. We did try to send them out in advance of the presentation, so if you couldn't see the screen or we're calling it only, that you'd have a digital copy of this, but we will follow up. So anybody who wants access, who is here or registered for this, will have that. And certainly we would encourage you to share those with anybody that couldn't be here or couldn't get registered. We're trying to make sure in whatever new world that we're living in terms of being in our homes, that we're finding the best ways that we can get this out. And also thanks everybody out there for your patience with us today. This is our team's first time of kind of presenting in this format publicly and trying to keep it organized and get to everybody's questions. So also, if you have any thoughts or comments, any feedback on that to us of what we could do better next time, that same phone number, that same email address, we would love to hear from you on that, so we can continue to improve.
And I would just like to add, I know we had 3 participants that called in via phone. We are not able to have email addresses for those participants. And so if you would like a copy of this presentation, please do either call or email us at the contact information that Kevin has shared, and that way we're able to share the presentation with you as well. And then anyone who registered via the Zoom link, we do already have the email that you registered with to share the information.
Well, thank you everybody. Appreciate your time on a Saturday afternoon. Feel free to follow up again if you have any questions. Otherwise, thank you for joining us, and thank you to our team for helping run this. We seem to have pulled it off for our first time, and we'll keep working at it. Thank you all.